I have a bit of a giggle when I hear people say, oh, you know, I have anxiety, and I kind of think, well, so do all of us, it's just a human thing. Hello and welcome to the Psych Diaries. My name's Ro, I'm a psychologist from Sydney, Australia, and today we're going to talk about anxiety. I'm going to start by talking a bit about what anxiety is, clearing up some of the myths, why we have anxiety from an evolutionary perspective, so dating back all the way to our caveman days, the different types of anxiety disorders, and then finally how we treat anxiety from a psychological perspective. So this is going to be a bit more of a general video about anxiety. I'm going to touch on all of the different types, but if you'd like a more specific video on one type of anxiety disorder, then let me know down below. So firstly, what is anxiety? It's an emotion that our body experiences, and the function is usually in relation to challenge, it's to motivate us, and it's to protect us. You have two components to anxiety. You have both an internal component in our head, thoughts and feelings, and we also have an external component, so body signals, physiological symptoms. In terms of the internal signals, you might often have racing thought, worries going out of control, you might feel like your head is getting stuck in loops or you're ruminating a lot, difficulty with concentration or focus, and often just this idea that you're just feeling uncomfortable. There are lots of difficult thoughts in your head. When it comes to more external signals, such as body signals, you've got your racing heart, sweaty palms, maybe difficulty breathing, like a quick breathing. You might get butterflies in the stomach or feel a bit sick in the stomach, and these are all different symptoms of anxiety. One interesting fact is actually that anxiety and excitement actually appear the same in our bodies. So the fast breathing, the racing heart, but it's just the way that we interpret those signals that kind of determines whether it's fun and we're pumped up or whether we're actually worried and stressed and it brings us down. So the way that we distinguish anxiety from just normal stress and worry is kind of seeing how much it impacts our lives. We only call it an anxiety disorder when it actually impacts our work, study, relationships, our ability to function. And then we say that if it's interfering, then we might need a bit more support. So part 2 is about why humans have anxiety. And I love talking about this topic. And I always have a bit of a giggle when I hear people say, oh, you know, I have anxiety. And I kind of think, well, so do all of us, it's just a human thing. We're going to use an evolutionary perspective and really dial back to when we were cavemen and cavewomen. We think about facing different types of threats. You might have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. Let's say cavewoman Rowena is back there thousands of years ago and a tiger, a saber-toothed tiger, comes running up to her. I have 3 different reactions. Either I can try and fight the tiger and give it a bit of a wrestling match, I can try and run away from the tiger, or I can try and play dead and just freeze up and like flop onto the floor. And so when it comes to those external or those body sensations of sweaty palms, racing heart, we can all attribute it back to this fight or flight response. It makes a lot of sense why our breathing gets quicker, because we're trying to oxygenate our blood, we're trying to get those limbs moving. It makes sense why we feel kind of tense, because our muscles are getting geared up, there's a shot of adrenaline. Our heart's racing quicker, also trying to oxygenate the blood. And those butterflies in our stomach is actually our digestive system kind of switching off for a bit and diverting the blood flow from the gut into our limbs to make it easier for us to fight or to run away. Unfortunately, we no longer have to run away from saber-toothed tigers. So in some way, anxiety is an outdated protection mode. Certainly helpful if maybe there's like a robber on the street, but most often we feel anxiety in very normal stationary scenarios, you know, sitting at our work desk, lying in bed, and being geared up and ready to fight or run away aren't very helpful, and they just get really uncomfortable, really. And the reason why we have these internal racing thoughts, that kind of stuff, I'm gonna talk about using examples. One example is we often think back on social situations, you know, I wish I hadn't done that, oh, that was so cringe, oh, I wonder what they're gonna say about me, that was so horrible. And that type of ruminating and reflecting on social situations is really helpful if you are a caveman or cavewoman, and where social exclusion from the tribe means that you're basically dead because you are cast away and you're living by yourself. It's really built into us for us to compare how we are in the tribe. Is that person performing better than me, weaker than me? Am I included? Do other people like me? That's a protection instinct. But in modern society, if we get kicked out of a group, there are plenty of other groups and we're also not going to die, and so it's not so helpful. Another example is maybe if we make a mistake on a test or something that we did at work, we might ruminate over and over again of, oh, I wish I didn't make that mistake, and I wonder if I should say this to my boss, and we try and problem solve things internally. And this makes sense if, say, it's a caveman reflecting on, oh, I really just like missed drowning on that river yesterday, and I must take a different route, and I have to go this way, and I make sure I have to bring my spear, and I have to make sure that if I see this, then I'm going to run this way. Again, it's a very survival-based thing, but it's not so helpful in our modern society. And so just kind of summarize all of that, we think about the experience of anxiety being something that is really helpful to protect us. It means that I don't walk in front of a car randomly. It's a way of us to motivate. It gets us ready for that swimming race, or it gets us pumped up for that speech. But when anxiety gets a little bit too high, it gets a bit excessive, then it can cause us a lot of problems. And so that's when we might start to veer into the land of disordered anxiety. So part 3 is about what are the different types of anxiety disorders. So first one is generalized worry. This is where people might describe worrying about all types of stuff: work, study, relationships, their weight, appearance, everything. And they might describe that the worry feels out of control, or that maybe they even feel like they're getting sick from the worry, and it's just constantly there. So that we might call that generalized anxiety disorder. Another type is social anxiety disorder, which is kind of fear of embarrassment or judgment from other people. It might lead to avoidance of performances like doing speeches, or avoidance of going to parties. There's also separation anxiety. We see this more commonly in children and adolescents. And this is fear of being away from a loved one, like a parent or a sibling. And often it's linked with fear that some danger might occur to that person as well. We've got agoraphobia, which is fear of particular places or situations outside of the home. So it might be fear of like public transport or crowds or large spaces. And again, often leads to avoidance and people staying at home. There's also panic disorder, which is characterized by recurrent panic attacks, as well as a fear of getting more panic attacks in the future as well. Specific phobias, and this might be a very intense fear of a type of animal or a thing or a situation. Most commonly, we might see fear of heights, spider phobia, needle phobia, like public speaking phobias, and again leading to avoidance. And finally, just to note that OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, used to be characterized under anxiety disorders, but with the new DSM, which I often call the Bible of psychological disorders, with the new DSM, they've actually characterized it in separate sections, and so I'll probably do a separate video for OCD or PTSD. So part 4 is how do psychologists treat anxiety? And the answer is primarily using CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT, I think I've talked about before. It's talking about the link between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. Anxiety leads to a lot of anxious thoughts. Often they're quite biased, they might be unrealistic, often veering towards negative outcomes or catastrophizing. And so when it comes to tackling thoughts, we're actually going to challenge those thoughts. We're going to look for evidence for and against. We're really going to try and bring logic in, and we're going to see how helpful the thought is, how likely the bad thing actually is going to happen. And the idea, really importantly, is not positive thinking, like, oh, it's going to be great, I'm going to smash the speech and the spider's going to be so friendly to me. It's realistic thinking. So a more balanced way of thinking as opposed to super negative and catastrophizing. So that's thoughts. When it comes to feelings, the way we tackle it is we might talk about sitting with the feeling. We might talk about changing our relationship to the feeling. So maybe using mindfulness to observe, to surf that feeling, to be able to sit with it better, as opposed to doing something unhelpful. And so that's where we work on behaviors. Anxiety is very, very often characterized by that flight response, which is trying to run away or get away from the anxiety. It might mean avoiding a speech, avoiding a social situation, avoiding having a certain difficult conversation with someone. We're actually encouraging people to approach. So if people are scared of needles, we actually do an exposure therapy. We actually get them to look at needles and then touch a needle and then pick up a needle and like hold it close to their skin, watch videos of people getting needles, and finally the last step of that graded exposure, we might actually get someone to have a needle themselves. A lot of what I do when it comes to anxiety treatment is just encouraging people, well, first of all, talking about that cycle of anxiety, understanding it better, and then encouraging people to actually face their fears. And so we combine this cognitive therapy of challenging our thoughts, making them more balanced, but also changing our actions so that we start approaching things, we learn they're not as scary or as dangerous as we thought they were. And the more we approach and we can actually disprove all of those worried thoughts about bad things happening, the lower our anxiety gets. And then finally, we've also got those like body sensations, like the racing heart, stuff like that. And sometimes psychologists employ relaxation strategies, aggressive muscle relaxation exercises, breathing exercises, thinking about grounding exercise. And so you might see that CBT involves a little bit of thoughts, behaviors, body work, sitting with feelings work, and you might combine all of those. And so that's mainly what I would do. But let's say a client has come and we've done a block of CBT and it's not really working, there's not a lot of change. I might refer someone to a psychiatrist or a doctor for medication. Typically we're thinking about SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but basically like antidepressants. And the idea is that with someone who has really intense anxiety, maybe we just want to lower their arousal a little bit to make it so that they can start functioning and work and study, be able to start applying therapeutic principles, and hopefully having that lowered anxiety in the short term means that they can build up these skills organically, ideally with the aim of getting off the medication and being able to function with a new set of skills and a new set of habits. That is the gold standard treatment, CBT, and if CBT doesn't work, then maybe medication. There are other forms of therapy, for instance, acceptance commitment therapy also has its own approach to anxiety, which talks about accepting that anxiety is here and thinking about the actions that we want to take forward, how can we follow what's important to us, act in a way that's aligned with our values, and be able to accept the internal experience and change our external environment. Alrighty, I hope that gave you a little bit of an overview of what anxiety is, why it's here, different types, as well as how we treat it as well. If you enjoyed today's video, feel free to comment down below any questions as well, and I'll try and get around to them, and let me know what other videos you'd like to see in the future. I really enjoy making these. It's kind of my bread and butter in terms of psychoeducation on a day-to-day basis. And so yeah, I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys have an amazing day and I'll see you next time. Bye!